Tycoon man publicly shames pregnant wife for new love. 3 years later, he's in shock. Another day. Another deal, he murmured, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed his domain. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his reverie. "Mr. Thornton, your 9 o'clock is here," his assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Send them in," Maxwell replied, straightening his designer tie and turning to face the door. As a group of nervous-looking executives filed into the room, Maxwell's piercing blue eyes scanned each face, already calculating how he could bend them to his will. The air crackled with tension as he took his seat at the head of the conference table. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade, "I hope you've brought me something worth my time today." The lead executive, a man named Johnson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Thornton, we believe we've found the perfect location for your next development project. It's a small neighborhood in Brooklyn, ripe for gentrification." Maxwell leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Go on." As Johnson detailed the proposal, Maxwell's mind raced with possibilities. He could already see the luxury condos rising from the ashes of the working-class neighborhood, the profits rolling in like a tidal wave. "And the current residents?" Maxwell asked, though his tone made it clear he cared little for the answer. Johnson hesitated. "Well, sir, there would be some displacement. But the economic benefits to the city," Maxwell waved his hand dismissively. "Spare me the social justice speech, Johnson. I'm not interested in holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I'm interested in results." He stood, walking to the window again. "Make it happen, whatever it takes." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, but nodded in agreement. They knew better than to argue with Maxwell Thornton. As the group filed out, Maxwell's assistant poked her head in. "Sir, your wife called. She wanted to remind you about the doctor's appointment this afternoon." For a moment, a flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps annoyance, crossed Maxwell's face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of cool indifference. "Tell her I'll be there," he said, though his tone suggested he had no intention of keeping that promise. As the door closed, leaving Maxwell alone once more, he turned back to the window. The city lay before him, full of opportunities to be seized, deals to be made, empires to be built, and nothing, not even the trivial matters of family, would stand in his way. Little did Maxwell know, the choices he was making today would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. But for now, he remained blissfully unaware, a king on his throne, never suspecting that his reign was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Olivia Thornton. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her green eyes, usually sparkling with warmth, were tinged with worry and fatigue. One hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. "You're late," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Maxwell grunted in response, brushing past her into the foyer. The contrast between the cozy, lived-in feel of their home and the sterile luxury of his office made him uncomfortable. "Maxwell," Olivia began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about the baby. About our future." He turned to face her, his expression impassive. "What's there to talk about? Everything's taken care of. The best doctors, the best schools." "That's not what I mean," Olivia interrupted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm talking about us, our family. You're never here, Maxwell. This baby, our child, deserves a father who's present." Maxwell's jaw clenched. "I'm providing for this family, Olivia. That's what a father does. A father does more than just provide money," Olivia pleaded, reaching out to touch his arm. Maxwell flinched away, and Olivia's face crumpled. "Don't you want this baby? Don't you want us?" For a moment, something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. A hint of the man Olivia had fallen in love with years ago. But then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Of course I want the baby," he said, his tone clipped. "But I have responsibilities, Olivia. I can't just drop everything because you're feeling needy." Olivia recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "Needy? Is that what you think this is?" Before Maxwell could respond, Olivia doubled over, gasping in pain. "Oh God," she whimpered, clutching her stomach. Panic flashed across Maxwell's face. "Olivia, what's wrong?" "The baby," she managed to say between labored breaths. "Something's not right." For a split second, Maxwell froze, torn between his instinct to help and his deep-seated aversion to emotional involvement. But as Olivia let out another cry of pain, he sprang into action, scooping her up in his arms and rushing to the car. As they sped towards the hospital, Maxwell's mind raced. The sight of Olivia in pain had cracked his carefully constructed facade, revealing the turmoil beneath. For the first time in years, he felt truly afraid, not for his empire or his reputation, but for the lives of his wife and unborn child. Little did Maxwell know, this night would mark a turning point in his life. The choices he would make in the coming hours and days would set him on a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the true meaning of family. As the city lights blurred past the car windows, Maxwell Thornton, the man who always had a plan, found himself facing a situation he couldn't control. And deep down, a part of him he'd long ignored began to stir, whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, he'd been chasing the wrong kind of success all along. Hours had passed since they'd rushed Olivia into the emergency room. Each tick of the clock on the wall felt like an eternity to Maxwell, who for once in his life felt utterly powerless. A nurse approached, her face unreadable. "Mr. Thornton?" Maxwell whirled around, his heart pounding. "Yes? How is she? How's the baby?" The nurse's expression softened slightly. "Your wife is stable now. The doctor would like to speak with you." Relief washed over Maxwell, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. He followed the nurse down a long corridor, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. Dr. Patel was waiting outside Olivia's room, her expression grave. "Mr. Thornton, I'm glad you're here. We've managed to stabilize your wife and prevent premature labor. But..." Maxwell's throat tightened. "But what?" "The pregnancy is high risk now. Your wife will need complete bed rest for the remainder of her term. She'll require constant care and support." The words hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Constant care and support, two things he'd been spectacularly failing to provide. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel nodded, stepping aside. Maxwell entered the room, his heart clenching at the sight of Olivia lying in the hospital bed, looking pale and fragile. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. "Maxwell," she murmured, reaching out a hand. He took it, surprised by how small and vulnerable it felt in his grasp. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have..." Olivia squeezed his hand weakly. The baby's okay," Maxwell assured her, his voice cracking. "But you need to rest. The doctor says you'll need to stay in bed until the birth." A shadow of fear crossed Olivia's face. "But your work, the company..." Maxwell felt a surge of shame. Even now, after he'd neglected her for so long, Olivia was thinking of his needs. "Don't worry about that," he said firmly. "You and the baby are what matter now." As the words left his mouth, Maxwell realized with a start that he meant them. For the first time in years, his priorities were shifting, realigning themselves around something other than his ambition. But even as he made this silent vow, a part of him rebelled against it. The empire he built, the deals in progress, the power he wielded, could he really step away from all that? As Olivia drifted off to sleep, her hand still in his, Maxwell stood at a crossroads. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with challenges he'd never faced before. He would have to choose between the life he'd built for himself and the family he'd been taking for granted. Outside the hospital room, the city continued its relentless pace. Somewhere in a towering skyscraper, Maxwell's phone was ringing unanswered. Deals were hanging in the balance, and a young, ambitious executive named Veronica was wondering why her boss hadn't shown up for their meeting. The stage was set for a battle between Maxwell's old life and the new one taking shape before him. As he watched Olivia sleep, Maxwell Thornton, the man who always knew his next move, found himself adrift in uncharted waters, with the most important decision of his life looming on the horizon. A sharp knock on the door jolted him back to reality. "Come in," he called, straightening up and attempting to look focused. Veronica strode in, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She was the epitome of corporate ambition, sleek, polished, and utterly ruthless. Her dark eyes gleamed with a mixture of concern and something else, something that made Maxwell shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Maxwell," she said, her voice a silky purr, "we've been worried about you. The Brooklyn deal is stalling, and the board is getting restless." Maxwell ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. I know. It's just been complicated lately." Veronica perched on the edge of his desk, leaning in close. "Is it your wife? The baby?" Her tone was sympathetic, but there was an undercurrent of something else: impatience, perhaps even disdain. "Olivia needs me right now," Maxwell said, surprised at the defensive note in his voice. "The business will have to wait." Veronica's eyebrows shot up. "Wait?" Maxwell Thornton, the man who built an empire from nothing, putting business on hold. She laughed, but it was without humor. "Who are you, and what have you done with the real Maxwell?" Her words struck a chord. Who was he becoming? The old Maxwell would never have let personal matters interfere with business. He'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let it all slip away now. Veronica seemed to sense his inner turmoil. She leaned in closer, her perfume enveloping him. "Maxwell, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. I've always been here." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air crackled with tension. Maxwell felt a pull towards her, towards the uncomplicated world of ambition and success she represented. It would be so easy to fall back into his old patterns, to let Veronica take care of things while he focused on what he did best, making money and wielding power. But then, unbidden, an image of Olivia flashed in his mind, pale and vulnerable in that hospital bed, her hand reaching for his. The conflicting emotions warred within him, leaving him feeling torn and more lost than ever. I need some time to think," Maxwell said, standing abruptly and moving away from Veronica. "Can you handle the Brooklyn deal for now?" Veronica's eyes flashed with triumph. "Of course, Maxwell. You can count on me. Always." As she sashayed out of the office, Maxwell felt as if he'd just made a deal with the devil. He turned to look out the window, the city sprawling before him, but for once, its glittering promise held no appeal. His phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. "Doctor's appointment at 3. Will you make it?" Maxwell stared at the message, his finger hovering over the reply button. In that moment, he stood at a precipice, teetering between two worlds. The choice he made now would set the course for everything that followed. With a deep breath, he began to type, the weight of his decision hanging heavy in the air. Little did he know, the consequences of his choice would ripple out far beyond this moment, setting in motion a chain of events that would test his loyalties, challenge his values, and ultimately force him to confront the man he had become. As the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across his office, Maxwell Thornton pressed send on his reply, sealing his fate and taking the first step down a path from which there would be no easy return. A soft knock on the door startled him. "Maxwell?" Olivia's voice was hesitant, tinged with a loneliness that made his chest tighten. He swiveled in his chair to face her. Olivia stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her now prominent belly, the other gripping the doorframe for support. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now held a resigned sadness that cut him to the core. "It's late," she said softly. "Are you coming to bed?" Maxwell glanced at his computer screen, then back at his wife. The conflict within him was palpable. I just need to finish this report. I'll be there soon." Olivia's face fell, but she nodded, turning to leave. As she did, Maxwell caught a glimpse of tears in her eyes. "Olivia, wait," he called out, surprising himself. She paused, looking back at him with a mixture of hope and wariness. Maxwell stood, crossing the room to her. He reached out, hesitantly placing a hand on her belly. How are you feeling? How's the baby?" A small smile flickered across Olivia's face, the first he'd seen in weeks. Active tonight. Here, feel. She guided his hand to a spot where their child was kicking. For a moment, Maxwell felt a connection he'd been missing to Olivia, to their unborn child, to the life he'd been neglecting. But as quickly as it came, the feeling was overshadowed by a wave of anxiety. He wasn't cut out for this. He didn't know how to be the husband and father they needed. Olivia sensed his withdrawal. "Maxwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm losing you, aren't I?" The raw pain in her voice made him flinch. He wanted to reassure her, to be the man she deserved. But the words stuck in his throat. "I'm trying, Olivia," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I'm really trying." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't enough. The look in Olivia's eyes told him she knew it too. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late." As she disappeared down the hallway, Maxwell felt the distance between them growing, a chasm he didn't know how to bridge. He turned back to his office, his sanctuary of spreadsheets and profit margins, but found no comfort there either. His phone buzzed, a text from Veronica. "Brooklyn deals hit a snag. Need you in the office early tomorrow. Breakfast meeting at 7? Maxwell stared at the message, feeling the pull of his old life, the siren call of ambition and success. It would be so easy to dive back in, to lose himself in the familiar world of high-stakes business. But as he glanced towards the bedroom where Olivia lay, he felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, regret, perhaps, or the first stirrings of a conscience he'd long ignored. He stood there, caught between two worlds, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The man he was and the man he could be were at war, and in that moment Maxwell Thornton realized that something had to give. As the night deepened outside, casting long shadows across the room, Maxwell made a decision. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the keys. The choice he made now would set the course for everything that followed: his marriage, his future, his very identity. With a deep breath, he began to type, the sound of his fingers on the keys echoing in the quiet house like the ticking of a countdown clock. Little did he know, the message he was about to send would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would shake his world to its very foundations. A soft knock on the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he called, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. Veronica glided in, immaculate as always, a stark contrast to Maxwell's disheveled appearance. She carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of him with a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" she asked, perching on the edge of his desk. Maxwell grunted in response, taking a long sip of the coffee. "The Brooklyn deal's going to fall through if we don't act fast." Veronica leaned in, her perfume enveloping him. "We'll figure it out, Maxwell. We always do." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air crackled with tension. Maxwell felt himself drawn to her, to the uncomplicated world she represented, a world of ambition, success, and power. A world where he didn't have to grapple with the messy emotions of family life. "Veronica," he started, his voice low, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "You'll never have to find out. I'm here, Maxwell. Always." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibilities. Maxwell found himself leaning towards her, drawn by a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was a text from Olivia. "Doctor says everything looks good. Wish you could have been here." The words hit Maxwell like a bucket of cold water. Guilt washed over him, mingling with a confusing cocktail of relief and regret. Veronica, sensing the shift, stood up smoothly. "I'll give you a moment. We can discuss the deal later." As she left, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, Maxwell felt as if he was standing on the edge of a precipice. On one side lay the familiar territory of his business empire, with Veronica as his guide. On the other, the unknown landscape of family life, with Olivia waiting patiently for him to find his way. He picked up his phone, staring at Olivia's message. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he wished he could be there? That he was failing as a husband and father before their child was even born? As he grappled with his response, Another text came through, this time from his assistant. Mr. Thornton, don't forget about the Charity Gala tonight. Your speech is scheduled for 8 p.m. Maxwell's heart sank. He'd completely forgotten about the gala. It was a crucial event, one that could make or break several important business relationships. But it was also the night Olivia had planned a small, intimate dinner to celebrate reaching the third trimester of her pregnancy. He looked at the two messages side by side, feeling as if they represented the two halves of his life that were rapidly becoming incompatible. The choice he made now would set the course for everything that followed. With a deep breath, Maxwell began to type. As his fingers moved across the screen, he felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Little did he know, the messages he was about to send would be the first dominoes to fall in a chain reaction that would irreversibly alter the course of his life. Outside his office window, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding within. As Maxwell hit send on his messages, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something monumental in motion, something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the true cost of ambition. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and honored guests, as he began his speech, his eyes scanned the room, landing on Veronica. She stood near the back, radiant in a form-fitting red dress. Her eyes locked on him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. Suddenly, a commotion at the entrance caught his attention. His heart nearly stopped as he saw Olivia making her way through the crowd, her pregnant belly prominently displayed in a simple, elegant maternity gown. Her face was a mask of hurt and anger. Maxwell faltered mid-sentence, the words dying on his lips. The audience murmured in confusion. I apologize, he stammered, trying to regain his composure. As I was saying, the future of our city. But Olivia was moving closer, her eyes never leaving his face. The crowd parted for her, whispers following in her wake. Maxwell, she called out, her voice carrying across the now silent room. I think it's time we had a talk. Right now. The tension in the room was palpable. Maxwell felt every eye on him, waiting to see how he would respond. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, and he knew that whatever he did next would change everything. He stepped away from the podium, his mind racing. Olivia, please. This isn't the time or place. When is the time, Maxwell? Olivia's voice cracked with emotion. When our child is born and you're too busy to notice. When you've missed every important moment because you were chasing the next big deal. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Maxwell could see phones being raised, no doubt capturing this moment for social media. His reputation, his deals, everything he'd built was hanging by a thread. Olivia, he said, his voice low and urgent as he reached her. Let's discuss this privately, but Olivia wasn't finished. She turned to address the crowd, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but I thought you should all know the truth about Maxwell Thornton. The man you admire, the great philanthropist and businessman, can't even find time to attend his wife's doctor appointments or be there for his unborn child. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Maxwell felt the weight of their judgment, their disappointment. He saw Veronica at the back of the room, her expression a mixture of shock and calculation. In that moment, standing before the crowd with his pregnant wife beside him, Maxwell Thornton faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could try to salvage his reputation, to spin the situation in his favor. Or he could finally face the truth about himself and his priorities. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation. Maxwell opened his mouth to speak, knowing that his next words would set in motion a chain of events from which there would be no turning back. As the chandeliers glittered overhead and the eyes of New York's elite bored into him, Maxwell Thornton stood on the precipice of a decision that would alter not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The man who had always prided himself on being in control now found himself at the mercy of a moment he never saw coming. It was Veronica who broke the impasse, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I think we've all had enough excitement for one evening, she said smoothly, stepping forward. Perhaps it's best if we give the Thorntons some privacy to sort out their domestic issues. Her words seemed to snap Maxwell out of his paralysis. He turned to Olivia, his face a mask of cold fury. "How dare you?" he hissed, low enough that only she could hear. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Olivia's eyes flashed with a mixture of hurt and defiance. "I've done what you forced me to do, Maxwell. I'm fighting for our family." Maxwell's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Family? Is that what this is about? Let me make something very clear, Olivia. This," he gestured to the crowd, the opulent ballroom, "this is my family, my legacy, and you've just put all of it at risk." As he spoke, he saw something break in Olivia's eyes. The last vestiges of hope, of love, seemed to drain away, replaced by a steely resolve he'd never seen before. "Then I guess we both know where we stand," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Goodbye, Maxwell." She turned to leave, her head held high despite the whispers, and, "Open." Dr. Patel emerged, her surgical mask pulled down, her eyes tired but holding a glimmer of hope. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice steady, "your wife is stable, but she's not out of the woods yet. The twins, however—" Maxwell's heart leapt into his throat. "The twins? Are they?" Dr. Patel's expression softened. "They're alive but premature. They'll need to stay in the NICU for a while. Would you like to see them?" Numbly, Maxwell nodded, following the doctor down the hallway. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, fear, and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. What did he know about being a father, let alone to premature twins? They stopped in front of a large window. Inside, two tiny forms lay in incubators, surrounded by a tangle of wires and beeping machines. "Your son and daughter," Dr. Patel said softly. Maxwell pressed his hand against the glass, his legs suddenly weak. "They're so small," he whispered. "They're fighters," the doctor assured him. "Just like their mother." The mention of Olivia snapped Maxwell back to reality. "Can I see her?" Dr. Patel nodded, leading him to another room. Olivia lay there, pale and still, hooked up to various monitors. The sight of her, so vulnerable, so unlike the vibrant woman he'd taken for granted, shook Maxwell to his core. He approached the bed slowly, taking her hand in his. It felt small and fragile, nothing like the hand that had slapped him at the gala weeks ago. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. For everything." To his surprise, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, confusion giving way to recognition, then to a mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. "The babies?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "They're alive," Maxwell assured her quickly. "They're small, but they're fighters. Just like you." A ghost of a smile flickered across Olivia's face. "You saw them?" Maxwell nodded, tears pricking at his eyes. "They're beautiful, Olivia. Perfect." For a moment, they sat in silence, the beeping of the monitors a stark reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. "Maxwell," Olivia said finally, her voice stronger now. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Maxwell knew she wasn't just asking about the immediate future. She was asking about them, about their family, about the choices that had led them to this moment. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his next words. "Now," he said slowly, "now I keep my promise. I'll be there for you, for our children. If you'll let me." Olivia's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. "And your work? Your empire?" Maxwell felt a pang of guilt, remembering the unanswered calls and messages on his phone. Veronica, the board, the Brooklyn deal. All of it seemed so distant now, so unimportant in the face of what truly mattered. "It can wait," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "This, you, our children. This is what's important now." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. "I want to believe you, Maxwell. But how can I trust that this isn't just another empty promise?" The hurt in her voice cut through him like a knife. Maxwell realized that rebuilding her trust, proving himself as a husband and father, would be the greatest challenge he'd ever faced, far more daunting than any business deal or corporate takeover. As he sat there, holding Olivia's hand, the world outside continued to spin. Somewhere in the city, his phone was ringing unanswered, deals were hanging in the balance, and his carefully constructed empire teetered on the edge of uncertainty. But here, in this quiet hospital room, Maxwell Thornton faced the most important negotiation of his life. The stakes were higher than any business deal, the future of his family. His chance at redemption hung in the balance. With a deep breath, he began to speak, knowing that the words he chose now would set the course for everything that followed. The man who had always put business first was about to embark on the most challenging and rewarding venture of his life, becoming the husband and father his family deserved. Olivia appeared in the doorway, her own fatigue evident but mingled with a cautious hope. "You're getting better at this," she said softly. Maxwell turned, a tired smile on his face. "I had a good teacher." The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of his phone. Maxwell tensed, recognizing the ringtone he'd assigned to work emergencies. Olivia's face fell, the old hurt and distrust flickering in her eyes. "Go ahead," she said, resignation in her voice. "I know it's important." Maxwell looked down at Emma, then at Ethan, and finally at Olivia. In that moment, he saw his whole world contained in this room. With a deep breath, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable to the old Maxwell. "No," he said firmly, silencing the phone. "This is what's important." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "But your work can wait," Maxwell finished. "I meant what I said, Olivia. I'm here now, fully and completely." As if on cue, Ethan began to wail, his cries piercing the tender moment. Maxwell chuckled, gently passing Emma to Olivia before scooping up his son. "Sure, little man," he murmured, pacing the room. "Daddy's got you." Olivia watched, tears welling in her eyes. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the one she'd always hoped was buried beneath the Ruthless Tycoon exterior. "Maxwell," she said softly, "I know this hasn't been easy for you. Giving up control, stepping back from work." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It hasn't been easy," he admitted, "but it's been worth it. Every sleepless night, every missed deal, every diaper change. I wouldn't trade it for anything." As he spoke, his phone buzzed again, insistently. Olivia nodded towards it. "You should at least check. It might be important." Maxwell hesitated, then nodded, balancing Ethan. In one arm, he glanced at the screen. His face paled slightly. "What is it?" Olivia asked, concern creeping into her voice. "It's Veronica," Maxwell said, his voice tight. "The Brooklyn deal is falling apart. She says if I don't come in now, we could lose everything." The air in the room grew heavy with tension. This was the moment of truth, the test of Maxwell's newfound commitment to his family. Olivia held her breath, waiting for his response. Maxwell looked at the phone, then at his family. The old pull of ambition tugged at him, whispering of power and success. But as he gazed at Olivia and their children, he felt a new, stronger force anchoring him to this moment. With a deep breath, he made his choice. "Tell me about your day," he said to Olivia, putting the phone face down on the dresser. "I want to hear everything." Olivia's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and joy. As she began to speak, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew there would be consequences for his decision, that his empire might crumble without his constant attention. But here, in this room with his family, he had found something far more valuable. Outside, the city hummed with the relentless pace of business and ambition. But inside the Thornton nursery, a different kind of wealth was growing, one built on love, trust, and second chances. As Maxwell listened to Olivia, still gently rocking Ethan, he knew that the road ahead would be challenging. Rebuilding trust, balancing family and career, learning to be the man his family needed. It would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But for the first time in his life, Maxwell Thornton was ready to face that challenge head-on, with his family by his side. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Veronica stood in the doorway, her usual confident demeanor tinged with uncertainty. Maxwell, she began, her voice carefully neutral. The board meeting is in an hour. They're expecting you to address the recent setbacks. He turned to face her, noting the dark circles under her eyes that matched his own. The past year had been brutal for Thornton Enterprises, with deals falling through and investors growing wary. "I'll be there," he said, his voice firm. "But I need you to understand something, Veronica. Things are different now." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "Different how?" "Maxwell, we're on the brink here. If we don't turn this around, then we don't," he interrupted, surprised by his own calmness. "Veronica, I've spent my life building this empire, but I've realized there are more important things." Veronica's eyes widened in disbelief. "More important than everything you've worked for? Than what we've built together?" The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Maxwell knew what Veronica was really asking, what she'd been hoping for all these years. "I'm sorry, Veronica," he said softly. "I know this isn't what you wanted, what you expected. But my family, your family," she scoffed, bitterness creeping into her voice. "The same family you were ready to leave behind a year ago? What changed, Maxwell?" Before he could answer, a peal of laughter echoed from down the hall. Olivia appeared in the doorway, Emma on her hip and Ethan toddling beside her. "Oh," Olivia said, her smile faltering as she saw Veronica. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." Maxwell moved to her side instinctively, his arm wrapping around her waist. "It's all right," he said, smiling down at Ethan who was reaching for him. "We were just finishing up." Veronica watched the scene unfold, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a moment, the room was thick with unspoken words and paths not taken. Finally, Veronica straightened, smoothing her skirt. "The board is waiting, Maxwell. Don't be late." With that, she turned on her heel and left, the click of her heels fading down the hallway. Olivia looked up at Maxwell, concern in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" He pulled her closer, dropping a kiss on Emma's head. "It will be," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. As he watched Ethan wobble across the room, determination etched on his little face, Maxwell felt a surge of pride and purpose. This, he realized, was success. Not the towers bearing his name or the deals worth millions, but these small moments of joy and growth. "I have to go to a meeting," he said to Olivia, "but I was thinking, maybe we could take the kids to the park this afternoon? Just the four of us." Olivia's face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "We'd love that," she said softly, as Maxwell prepared to face the board, to navigate the choppy waters of a business in decline. He felt a strange sense of peace. The empire he'd spent his life building might be crumbling, but here, in this home filled with love and laughter, he was constructing something far more valuable and lasting. He picked up his briefcase, stealing one last glance at Olivia playing with the twins. The man who once would have sacrificed anything for success now understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or deals. It was here, in the giggles of his children and the love in his wife's eyes. Maxwell Thornton stepped out of his penthouse, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in his life, he wasn't driven by ambition or greed, but by a desire to be worthy of the love and trust his family had given him. The future was uncertain, but as long as he had them by his side, he knew he could face anything. "Daddy, look," Ethan called out, proudly holding up a colorful leaf. Maxwell's heart swelled as he knelt down to examine his son's treasure. "It's beautiful, buddy. Great find." As he stood, he caught sight of a familiar face across the playground. Veronica stood there, her tailored suit out of place among the casual parkgoers. Their eyes met, and Maxwell felt a chill run down his spine. "Olivia," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll be right back." He approached Veronica cautiously, noting the hard set of her jaw and the determination in her eyes. "What are you doing here, Veronica?" he asked, glancing back at his family. She held up a file. "You've been ignoring my calls, Maxwell. The company is in freefall. We need to talk." Maxwell sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I told you, I'm stepping back. The board can handle." "The board?" Veronica interrupted, her laugh bitter. "They're calling for your resignation, Maxwell. Everything we've built is falling apart, and you're here playing happy families." Her words stung, but as Maxwell looked back at Olivia and the twins, he felt a resolve strengthening within him. "I'm not playing at anything, Veronica. This is my life now. My priority." Veronica's eyes flashed with anger and something else, hurt, perhaps. "And what about your legacy? The empire you spent years building? Are you really willing to throw it all away?" Before Maxwell could respond, he felt a small hand tugging at his pant leg. Emma looked up at him with wide eyes, holding out her arms to be picked up. Without hesitation, Maxwell scooped her up, feeling her tiny arms wrap around his neck. He turned back to Veronica, seeing the conflict play out on her face. "This is my legacy now, Veronica," he said softly. "I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear." For a moment, Veronica's mask slipped, revealing a vulnerability Maxwell had never seen before. "I thought we were building something together," she whispered. Maxwell felt a pang of guilt, realizing for the first time how much his single-minded ambition had affected those around him. "I'm sorry, Veronica, truly, but I can't go back to being that person." Olivia approached, Ethan in tow, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Is everything okay?" Maxwell nodded, pulling her close with his free arm. "Everything's fine. Veronica was just leaving." Veronica looked at the family before her, the picture of domestic bliss she had never allowed herself to want. With a curt nod, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. As they watched her go, Olivia squeezed Maxwell's hand. "Are you sure you're okay? I know how much the company means to you." Maxwell looked at his wife, then at the children in their arms. He thought about the empire he'd built, the deals he'd made, the power he'd wielded. And then he thought about the joy he'd felt watching Ethan find that perfect leaf, the warmth of Emma's hug, the love in Olivia's eyes. "You know what?" he said, a smile spreading across his face. "I've never been more okay in my life." As they turned back to the playground, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain. His business empire might crumble. His reputation in the corporate world might never recover. But here, with his family, he had found a success that no boardroom could ever provide. The autumn sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park. Maxwell Thornton, once the titan of industry, now pushed his son on the swing, his daughter's laughter ringing in his ears. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly, completely rich. Olivia entered the kitchen, her arms full of groceries. "Any luck?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Maxwell looked up, a tired smile on his face. "We're staying afloat. It's not what it used to be, but we're making it work." She set the bags down and moved behind him, massaging his tense shoulders. "I'm proud of you, for sticking with it, for finding a balance." He leaned into her touch, grateful for her unwavering support. "It hasn't been easy," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if—" His words were cut off by the sound of the doorbell. They exchanged puzzled glances. They weren't expecting anyone. Maxwell rose to answer it, Olivia following close behind. As he opened the door, his jaw dropped in shock. Veronica stood there, looking nothing like her usual polished self. Her hair was disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, and she clutched a thick folder to her chest. "Maxwell," she said, her voice hoarse, "I need your help." He hesitated, feeling Olivia tense beside him. "Veronica, what's going on?" She pushed past them into the apartment, her eyes wild. "It's all falling apart. The company, the deals, everything. They're saying I've committed fraud." Maxwell's mind raced. He'd stepped away from the day-to-day operations, trusting Veronica to keep things running. Had she crossed lines he wouldn't have? "Slow down," he said, guiding her to the living room. "Tell me everything." As Veronica launched into a frenzied explanation of creative accounting and desperate measures to keep the company afloat, Maxwell felt a growing sense of dread. He'd left her to deal with the fallout of his abrupt departure, and now, Olivia touched his arm gently. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, her voice neutral but her eyes conveying a mix of concern and trust. As she left the room, Maxwell turned back to Veronica. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "You made it clear where your priorities lay. I thought I could handle it, save what we built. But now," she gestured helplessly at the folder. "It's all there. The evidence. I don't know what to do, Maxwell." He took the folder, his hands shaking slightly. As he flipped through the pages, the magnitude of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about saving the company anymore. It was about avoiding prison time. Maxwell closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. He'd walked away, thinking he could leave it all behind. But now, faced with Veronica's desperation and the potential legal consequences, he realized it wasn't that simple. "I'll need to look this over carefully," he said finally. "We'll figure something out, Veronica. Promise." As she left, looking slightly less frantic, Maxwell sank onto the couch. Olivia reappeared, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. Maxwell looked at her, then down at the damning folder in his lap. He thought about the life they'd built, the peace he'd found, and he thought about Veronica and the company that had once meant everything to him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't just walk away. Not again." Olivia nodded, understanding and fear warring in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, we'll face it together." As the sun set outside their window, casting long shadows across the room, Maxwell Thornton found himself once again at a crossroads. The man he'd become, the father and husband he'd grown into, now faced a challenge that threatened everything he held dear. The empire he'd thought he'd left behind was calling him back. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As he held Olivia close, listening to the distant sounds of the twins playing in their room, Maxwell knew that the decisions he made in the coming days would test not just his business acumen, but the very core of who he had become. The future, once so certain, now loomed before him, fraught with uncertainty and potential peril. But as he looked into Olivia's eyes, he found the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The story of Maxwell Thornton, it seemed, was far from over. A soft knock at the door broke his concentration. Olivia entered, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "You've been in here for hours," she said, her voice laced with concern. "Have you found anything?" Maxwell sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's worse than I thought. Veronica took some big risks, made some questionable deals. If this gets out..." He trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Olivia set the coffee down and perched on the edge of the desk, her hand finding his. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. Maxwell looked up at her, conflict etched on his face. "I don't know. If I step back in, try to fix this, it could mean sacrificing everything we've built here. Our life, our family time. But if I don't..." "Veronica goes to jail," Olivia finished, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of the decision pressed down on Maxwell. He thought of Veronica, of their years building the company together. He thought of the employees whose livelihoods hung in the balance. And he thought of his family, of the promises he'd made to be present, to put them first. "I need to make some calls," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Do what you need to do. We'll be here." As she left the room, Maxwell picked up his phone. His finger hovered over the contact list, old names and numbers he hadn't used in months. With a deep breath, he pressed call. "Richard? It's Maxwell Thornton. I need a favor." Hours passed as Maxwell called in old debts, leveraged relationships, and crafted a plan to salvage what was left of Thornton Enterprises. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his office, he finally set down the phone. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion and a glimmer of hope warring within him. There was a chance, a small one, that he could fix this without losing everything he'd gained in the past year. The sound of laughter drifted in from the living room. Maxwell stood, drawn to the noise. He paused in the doorway, watching as Olivia played with the twins, their giggles filling the air. Ethan spotted him first. "Daddy!" he cried, toddling over with arms outstretched. Maxwell scooped him up, holding him close. Emma soon joined them, wrapping herself around his leg. Olivia looked up, a question in her eyes. "It's not over yet," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think we have a chance." Olivia stood, joining their family embrace. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we face it together." As Maxwell held his family close, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, fraught with legal battles and tough decisions. But for the first time since Veronica had shown up at their door, he felt a glimmer of hope. The man who had once sacrificed everything for success now understood that true wealth lay in the arms of his family. And as he looked at Olivia, at the twins, he knew that no matter what happened with the company, he had already won the most important battle of his life. The future was uncertain, but Maxwell Thornton was ready to face it head-on, with his family by his side and a new understanding of what truly mattered. The story of redemption, of second chances, was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. "Gentlemen," Maxwell began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart, "I know the past year has been challenging, but I'm here today to propose a way forward." He launched into his plan, a restructuring of the company, a series of strategic divestitures, and a new focus on sustainable, ethical business practices. As he spoke, he could see the doubt in some eyes slowly giving way to interest. "And what about the allegations of fraud?" one board member asked, his tone sharp. Maxwell took a deep breath. "I take full responsibility for the actions taken in my absence. We will cooperate fully with any investigation and make restitution where necessary." The room erupted into murmurs. Maxwell's eyes found Veronica, sitting quietly in the corner. She gave him a small nod, gratitude and regret mingling in her gaze. As the meeting stretched on, Maxwell felt the tide turning. His passion, his vision for a new kind of Thornton Enterprises was beginning to resonate. When the final vote was called, he held his breath. "The board approves the restructuring plan," the chairman announced. "Mr. Thornton, welcome back as CEO." A wave of relief washed over Maxwell, but it was quickly tempered by the realization of what this meant. He'd be back in the corporate world, back to long hours and high stakes. As the room cleared, Veronica approached him. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know what this cost you." Maxwell nodded, a bittersweet smile on his face. "It's not over yet. We have a lot of work to do." He left the office late that night, his mind racing with plans and strategies. As he opened the door to his home, he was greeted by the sight of Olivia asleep on the couch, a children's book open on her lap. Guilt gnawed at him as he realized he'd missed bedtime again. He gently woke Olivia, who blinked up at him sleepily. "How did it go?" she asked, sitting up. Maxwell sat beside her, taking her hand. "We did it. The board approved the plan. I'm CEO again." Olivia's face was a complex mix of emotions, pride, worry, and a hint of sadness. "That's wonderful, Maxwell. But what does this mean for us? For our family?" He pulled her close, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but I promise you, things will be different this time. I won't lose sight of what's truly important." As they sat there in the quiet of their home, Maxwell felt the weight of his promise. He knew the challenges ahead would test him, would pull him in different directions. The lure of corporate success, the thrill of the deal, it was all still there, humming beneath the surface. But as he thought of the twins sleeping peacefully in their rooms, of the life he and Olivia had built, he felt a resolve strengthening within him. This was his true legacy, his most important venture. "We'll make it work," he whispered, as much to himself as to Olivia. Together, as they headed to bed, Maxwell paused to look in on the twins. Watching their peaceful slumber, he made a silent vow. He would build a company they could be proud of, a legacy of integrity and purpose. And more importantly, he would be the father they deserved, present and engaged, no matter the demands of his revived career. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and difficult choices. But as Maxwell Thornton closed the nursery door and joined his wife in bed, he felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. The greatest challenge of his life lay ahead, balancing the demands of his renewed empire with the needs of his family. But for the first time, he felt truly equipped to face it. The story of Maxwell Thornton of redemption and second chances was entering a new chapter. And as he drifted off to sleep, his arm around Olivia, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement for what the future might hold. A knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. Veronica entered, a stack of papers in her arms. "The quarterly reports are in," she said, her tone professional but tinged with excitement. "You're going to want to see this." Maxwell took the papers, his eyes widening as he scanned the numbers. "This can't be right," he murmured. Veronica smiled, a hint of her old confidence returning. "It is. The new initiatives are paying off. We're not just recovering, we're thriving." A surge of pride washed over Maxwell, quickly followed by a pang of guilt. He glanced at the clock. 7:30 p.m. He'd promised Olivia he'd be home for dinner. "This is fantastic work, Veronica," he said, handing the reports back. "We'll discuss this further tomorrow. I need to get home." Veronica's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Give my best to Olivia and the kids." As Maxwell rushed out of the office, he couldn't help but notice the hint of longing in Veronica's eyes. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on getting home. He arrived just as Olivia was putting the twins to bed. Emma's face lit up as he entered the nursery. "Daddy, you're home!" she exclaimed, reaching out for a hug. Maxwell scooped her up, breathing in her sweet, baby shampoo scent. "I wouldn't miss saying goodnight to my little princess." Ethan, already half asleep, mumbled a drowsy "night, Daddy," as Maxwell kissed his forehead. As they left the nursery, Olivia's face was a mix of joy and resignation. "I'm glad you made it," she said softly. "Even if it's just for bedtime." Maxwell felt a stab of guilt. "I'm sorry, Liv. Things at the office are, well, they're actually going incredibly well. But I know that's no excuse." They moved to the living room, settling onto the couch. Olivia curled up next to him, and for a moment, Maxwell felt the tension of the day melt away. "Tell me about it," Olivia said, genuine interest in her voice. "How's the new direction working out?" As Maxwell explained the company's turnaround, he felt a familiar excitement building. The thrill of success, of seeing his vision come to life, was intoxicating. But as he spoke, he noticed a shadow pass over Olivia's face. "What's wrong?" he asked, pausing mid-sentence. Olivia sighed, sitting up to face him. "I'm proud of you, Maxwell. I truly am. But I can't help feeling like we're slipping back into old patterns. Late nights, missed dinners." Her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so caught up in the company's success, he hadn't realized he was falling into his old habits. "Liv, he started, but she held up a hand. "I know you're trying," she said gently, "but the kids are growing so fast." Ethan said his first full sentence today. "Did you know that?" Maxwell's heart sank. He'd missed it, just like he'd missed so many moments before. "I don't want to hold you back," Olivia continued, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your work is important, but so is this, our family. I need to know that we're not going to lose you again." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Maxwell realized he was standing at another crossroads. The company was thriving, but at what cost? Could he truly have it all, success in business and a fulfilling family life? He took Olivia's hands in his, meeting her gaze. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so focused on proving myself at work. I've been neglecting what's truly important. That changes now." As he spoke the words, Maxwell felt a shift within himself. The challenge ahead was daunting, finding a true balance between his ambition and his love for his family. But looking into Olivia's eyes, seeing the hope and love there, he knew it was a challenge he had to meet. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted. "But I promise you here and now that our family comes first. Always." Olivia's smile was watery but genuine. "That's all I needed to hear," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Maxwell's mind raced with ideas. How could he restructure the company to allow for more family time? What changes could he implement to ensure he never missed another milestone in his children's lives? The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Maxwell felt truly equipped to navigate it. With Olivia by his side and the love of his children driving him forward, he was ready to redefine success on his own terms. As the city lights twinkled outside their window, Maxwell Thornton held his wife close, feeling a sense of peace and purpose he'd never known before. The greatest adventure of his life was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maxwell began, his voice steady, "I've called this meeting to propose a significant change in how we operate." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his next words. "I want to implement a company-wide 4-day workweek, with no reduction in pay." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some board members looked intrigued, others outraged. Maxwell held up his hand, silencing the room. "I know this sounds radical," he continued, "but hear me out. Studies have shown that a shorter workweek can increase productivity, improve employee satisfaction, and reduce burnout. More importantly, it aligns with our new company values of sustainability and work-life balance." As Maxwell laid out his vision, he could see the skepticism in some eyes slowly giving way to interest. But not everyone was convinced. "This is preposterous," growled Harold, the oldest board member. "We'll lose millions. The shareholders will revolt." Maxwell met Harold's gaze steadily. "Or we could gain a competitive edge in attracting top talent, increase productivity, and set a new standard for corporate responsibility." The debate raged on, with Maxwell fielding questions and addressing concerns. As the meeting stretched into its third hour, he felt the tide beginning to turn. Finally, the chairman called for a vote. Maxwell held his breath as the hands went up. It was close, but "The motion passes," the chairman announced. "Thornton Enterprises will pilot a 4-day workweek for the next 6 months." As the room cleared, Veronica approached Maxwell, her expression unreadable. "Bold move," she said. "I hope you know what you're doing." Maxwell nodded, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. "It's a risk, but one worth taking." He left the office early that day, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. As he walked through the front door of his home, he was greeted by the sound of laughter. Maxwell found Olivia and the twins in the backyard, engaged in an impromptu water fight. Ethan spotted him first, his face lighting up. "Daddy, you're home early," he exclaimed, running towards Maxwell with open arms, water gun forgotten. Maxwell scooped him up, not caring that his suit was getting soaked. "That's right, buddy. And guess what? Daddy's going to be home early a lot more from now on." Olivia looked up, surprise and hope mingling in her eyes. "What do you mean?" As the family settled on the patio, Maxwell explained the new 4-day workweek policy. Olivia listened intently, her expression moving from shock to excitement. "Maxwell, that's incredible," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But are you sure? What about the company?" He took her hand, meeting her gaze. "The company will adapt. This is about more than just profits, Liv. It's about creating a legacy our children can be proud of." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the backyard, Maxwell watched Emma and Ethan play. He felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. But even as he basked in this moment of family bliss, a part of him couldn't help but worry. Would the new policy work? Could he really change the cutthroat culture of corporate America? And what would happen if it all fell apart? As if sensing his inner turmoil, Olivia squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we're in this together." Maxwell nodded, drawing strength from her support. He knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But looking at his family, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The man who had once measured success in dollars and deals now understood that true wealth lay in moments like these. As the twins' laughter filled the air and Olivia's hand remained steady in his, Maxwell Thornton felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of Thornton Enterprises was entering a new chapter, one that could redefine the very nature of success in the corporate world. And as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Maxwell couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement for the journey ahead. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "today I'm pleased to share the outcomes of Thornton Enterprises' bold new initiative." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Over the past 6 months, we've seen a 20% increase in productivity, a 15% reduction in employee turnover, and perhaps most surprisingly, a 10% increase in our bottom line." The room erupted in a flurry of questions and exclamations. Maxwell held up his hand, silencing the crowd. "But numbers only tell part of the story," he continued. "What truly matters is the impact on our employees' lives. We've seen improved mental health, stronger family connections, and a renewed sense of purpose in our workforce." As he fielded questions from the press, Maxwell caught sight of Veronica at the back of the room. Her expression was a mix of pride and something else. Regret, perhaps? After the press conference, Veronica approached him. "Impressive results," she said, her tone professional but tinged with warmth. "You've proven a lot of people wrong, myself included." Maxwell nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Thank you for your support, Veronica. I couldn't have done this without you." A shadow passed over Veronica's face. "Maxwell, there's something I need to tell you. I've been offered a position at a rival firm." The news hit Maxwell like a punch to the gut. Despite their complicated history, Veronica had been his right hand throughout this transformation. The thought of losing her felt like losing a limb. "I see," he said, struggling to keep his voice neutral. Is this because of the changes we've made?" Veronica shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "No, it's because of the changes you've made. In yourself, in the company. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but I think it's time for me to find my own path." Maxwell felt a lump form in his throat. "I understand," he said softly. "You'll be missed, Veronica. Not just as a colleague, but as a friend." As Veronica walked away, Maxwell felt a chapter of his life closing. He made his way home, his mind swirling with emotions and memories. He found Olivia in the kitchen, helping the twins with a baking project. The sight of flour-covered faces and giggles lifted his spirits immediately. "Daddy!" Emma exclaimed, running to hug him, leaving flowery handprints on his suit. "We're making cookies." Maxwell scooped her up, inhaling the sweet scent of vanilla and childhood innocence. "I see that, princess. They smell delicious." Olivia met his eyes over Emma's head, immediately sensing something was off. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Maxwell nodded, setting Emma down. "Just a big day. Mind if we talk later?" As the evening wound down and the twins were tucked into bed, Maxwell and Olivia settled on the patio, the night air cool and comforting. "Veronica's leaving," Maxwell said finally, his voice low. "She's taken a job with a competitor." Olivia took his hand, her touch grounding him. "How do you feel about that?" Maxwell sighed, looking out at the city lights. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Proud of her for making her own way. Sad to lose such a valuable team member. Worried about the future of the company." "And," Olivia prompted gently. "And," relieved, Maxwell admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Like a chapter of my life is finally closing. Making room for something new." Olivia squeezed his hand. "Change can be scary, but it can also be an opportunity." As they sat there in comfortable silence, Maxwell felt a sense of peace wash over him. Yes, challenges lay ahead. The company would need to adapt to Veronica's departure, and there would always be those waiting for him to fail. But looking at Olivia, thinking of the twins sleeping peacefully inside, Maxwell knew he had everything he needed to face whatever came next. "You know," he said, a smile tugging at his lips, "I think it's time we took that family vacation we've been talking about. What do you say to a week in the Maldives?" Olivia's face lit up. "Really? You can take the time off?" Maxwell nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I can, and I will. It's time to practice what I preach about work-life balance." As they began to plan their trip, excitement building between them, Maxwell Thornton felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had transformed his company, rebuilt his family life, and was forging a new path in the corporate world. The future was uncertain, but for once, that uncertainty felt thrilling rather than daunting. With his family by his side and a clear vision of what truly mattered, Maxwell was ready to write the next chapter of his story, one that balanced ambition with love, success with fulfillment. As the stars twinkled overhead, Maxwell pulled Olivia close, grateful for second chances and the wisdom to recognize what truly made life rich. The journey ahead was bound to be challenging, but he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. As the children's giggles carried on the warm breeze, Maxwell felt a vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his phone, hesitating for a moment before checking the message. It was from his new COO, Sarah. Urgent situation. Major investor threatening to pull out. Need your input ASAP. Maxwell's heart sank. He'd promised Olivia and the kids that this vacation would be work-free, a time to reconnect and rebuild. But this could potentially undo everything he'd worked so hard to achieve. He looked up, catching Olivia's eye. She must have sensed his tension, because she began ushering the twins out of the water and towards him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Maxwell sighed, showing her the message. "I might need to make a call," he said, the guilt evident in his voice. Olivia's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "Do what you need to do. We'll start packing up for dinner." As his family retreated to their beach villa, Maxwell dialed Sarah's number, his mind already racing with potential solutions. "Talk to me," he said as soon as she picked up. Sarah's voice was tense. "It's Blackstone Holdings. They're not happy with the 4-day workweek policy. They're threatening to sell their shares if we don't revert to a traditional schedule." Maxwell felt a surge of anger. "They agreed to give it a 6-month trial. We've shown results." "I know," Sarah replied, "but they're claiming it's not sustainable long-term. They want a meeting, Maxwell. Tomorrow. The last day of their family vacation. The day he'd promised to take the twins snorkeling to see the coral reefs." Maxwell started, then paused. He looked towards the villa, where he could see Olivia helping the twins change out of their swimsuits. He thought of the promise he'd made, not just to them, but to himself. "Tell them I'm unavailable," he said firmly. "Schedule the meeting for next week, when I'm back in the office. And Sarah, prepare a full presentation on our productivity metrics, employee satisfaction surveys, and financial reports. We're not backing down." He could hear the smile in Sarah's voice. "Yes, sir. Enjoy your vacation, Maxwell. You've earned it." As he ended the call, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd made the right choice, he was sure of it. But a niggling doubt remained. What if this decision cost him everything he'd built? He made his way back to the villa, where Olivia was helping Ethan with his shirt buttons. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Maxwell nodded, scooping Emma up as she ran to him. "Everything's fine. Nothing that can't wait until we're back home." Olivia's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and pride. "Really? You're not going to?" "Nope," Maxwell said, bouncing Emma on his hip. "I made a promise to my family, and I intend to keep it. Now, who's ready for some dinner and stargazing?" As they walked hand in hand towards the resort's restaurant, the twins chattering excitedly about the constellations they hoped to see, Maxwell felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that challenges awaited him back in New York. Angry investors, tough decisions, the constant battle to maintain the balance he'd fought so hard to achieve. But here, in this moment, with the people he loved most in the world, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Whatever storms lay ahead, he would weather them with his family by his side. The old Maxwell would have jumped on the first plane back, sacrificing this precious time for the sake of the company. But this new version of himself understood that true success wasn't measured in stock prices or profit margins. It was measured in moments like these: the feel of his daughter's arms around his neck, the sound of his son's laughter, the love shining in Olivia's eyes. As they settled at their table, the Maldivian night spreading out before them like a blanket of stars, Maxwell Thornton felt a thrill of excitement for the future. He had redefined success on his own terms, and he was ready to fight for this new vision, not just for himself, but for his family and for every employee who depended on him. The journey ahead would be challenging, but looking at the faces of his loved ones, Maxwell knew he had all the strength he needed to face whatever came next. The story of the Thornton family was far from over, in fact. He had a feeling the best chapters were yet to come. "Mr. Thornton," began Richard Blackstone, his voice cold and clipped, "we've reviewed your data, and while the short-term results are impressive, we remain unconvinced of the long-term viability of this experiment." Maxwell took a deep breath, centering himself. He thought of the promise he'd made on that beach, of Emma's laughter as they explored the coral reefs, of Ethan's wide-eyed wonder at the stars. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about creating a world where work and life could coexist harmoniously. "Gentlemen," Maxwell began, his voice steady and confident, "what we're doing here isn't just an experiment. It's the future of work." He launched into his presentation, passion evident in every word. As he spoke of increased productivity, improved employee mental health, and the positive impact on families, he could see the skepticism in some eyes starting to waver. "But the bottom line," interjected another investor, "is that this policy is costing us money." Maxwell shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "On the contrary," he said, pulling up a new slide, "our profit margins have increased by 12% since implementing the 4-day workweek. Happy employees are productive employees, and that translates directly to our bottom line." The room fell silent as the investors pored over the numbers. Maxwell could feel the tide turning, but he knew he needed something more to seal the deal. "I understand your concerns," he said softly, his tone shifting. "Change is always scary, especially in our world. But let me ask you this: what kind of world do we want to create? One where people exist to serve corporations, or one where businesses exist to improve people's lives?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "I have 2 young children at home. Every day, I ask myself what kind of future I'm building for them. With this policy, we're not just changing Thornton Enterprises. We're changing the very nature of work itself. And that, gentlemen, is an investment in the future that will pay dividends for generations to come." The room was silent for a long moment. Maxwell could feel his heart pounding, knowing that everything he'd worked for hung in the balance. Finally, Richard Blackstone leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Thornton," he began, and Maxwell braced himself for the worst. "I must admit, when I came here today, I was prepared to divest our interests in your company." Maxwell felt his stomach drop, but he maintained his composure. However, Blackstone continued, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "You've given me much to think about. Your passion is infectious, and your results are undeniable." He extended his hand across the table. "Blackstone Holdings will not only maintain our investment in Thornton Enterprises, but we'd like to discuss increasing our stake. I believe you're onto something revolutionary here, Mr. Thornton." Relief and elation washed over Maxwell as he shook Blackstone's hand. As the meeting adjourned and congratulations were exchanged, he felt a profound sense of vindication. He'd taken a risk, stood by his principles, and it had paid off. As he left the office that evening, Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How did it go? The twins and I are waiting with bated breath." Maxwell smiled, his heart full. He dialed Olivia's number, eager to share the good news. "Hey," Olivia answered, concern evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Maxwell replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it, Liv. They're not just staying on board. They want to increase their investment." Olivia's joyful laugh echoed through the phone. "Oh, Maxwell, I'm so proud of you." In the background, he could hear Emma and Ethan clamoring to know what was happening. "Tell the kids I'm on my way home," Maxwell said, quickening his pace. "We're going out to celebrate. As a family." As he hung up and hailed a taxi, Maxwell felt a sense of profound contentment wash over him. He had faced one of the biggest challenges of his career and come out victorious, not by sacrificing his principles, but by standing firm in his convictions. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight in this new world he was trying to create. But with his family by his side and a renewed sense of purpose driving him forward, Maxwell Thornton felt ready to take on anything. As the taxi weaved through the New York traffic, Maxwell closed his eyes, savoring this moment of triumph. The story of Thornton Enterprises and the Thornton family was far from over. In fact, he had a feeling the most exciting chapters were yet to come. "Dad, you're making me dizzy," Emma quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Maxwell stopped, a sheepish smile crossing his face. "Sorry, sweetheart. This is big." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Are you finally going to tell us what this mysterious meeting was about?" Maxwell took a deep breath, looking at each member of his family in turn. The love and trust he saw in their eyes gave him strength. "All right," he began, his voice steady. "As you know, Thornton Enterprises has been at the forefront of workplace innovation for years now. Our 4-day workweek model has been adopted by companies worldwide." The twins nodded, pride evident in their expressions. They'd grown up hearing about their father's revolutionary approach to business. "Well," Maxwell continued, "I've been approached with an opportunity. The United Nations wants me to lead a global initiative on work-life balance and sustainable business practices." The room erupted in exclamations of surprise and congratulations. Olivia's eyes shone with pride as she squeezed Maxwell's hand. "That's amazing, Dad," Ethan exclaimed. But Emma, always perceptive, caught the hint of hesitation in her father's voice. "There's a but coming, isn't there?" she asked softly. Maxwell nodded, his expression growing serious. "It would mean a lot of travel. Speaking engagements, meetings with world leaders, setting up programs in different countries. It's a big commitment." The weight of his words settled over the room. They all knew what this meant. Less time together, missed events, the very thing Maxwell had fought so hard to avoid in the past. Olivia spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Maxwell, this is an incredible opportunity. The chance to make a real difference on a global scale." "I know," Maxwell sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But I made a promise to this family. To be present, to put you first. I don't want to go back on that." Emma and Ethan exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only siblings can have. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Dad," he said, his voice surprisingly mature, "you taught us that success isn't just about money or power. It's about making a positive impact on the world." Emma nodded in agreement. "You've already changed things here. Maybe it's time to take that change global." Maxwell felt a lump form in his throat. When had his children become so wise? "But what about you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to miss any more of your lives than I already have." Olivia stood, wrapping her arms around him. "We'll make it work," she said softly. "Maybe we can travel with you sometimes. And when we can't, we'll use all that technology you've invested in to stay connected." Maxwell looked at his family, overwhelmed by their support and understanding. He thought about the journey that had brought him here from Ruthless Tycoon to advocate for work-life balance. And now, the chance to spread that message globally. "Are you sure?" he asked, his gaze moving from Olivia to the twins. "This will mean big changes for all of us." They nodded, their faces resolute. Emma spoke up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Besides, Dad, think of all the cool places we'll get to visit. You owe us." After that board meeting interrupted our Maldives trip all those years ago. The tension in the room broke as they all laughed, remembering that pivotal moment in their family's history. Maxwell felt a surge of love and gratitude wash over him. He'd spent years learning to balance his ambition with his love for his family. Now, it seemed they were offering him the chance to take that balance to a whole new level. "All right," he said, his voice filled with determination and excitement. "Let's do this. Together." As the family huddled in a group hug, Maxwell Thornton felt a familiar thrill, the excitement of a new challenge, a new chapter unfolding. But this time, it wasn't just about business success. It was about creating a legacy of balance, sustainability, and family unity that could change the world. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with new obstacles and difficult choices. But as Maxwell held his family close, he knew that whatever came their way, they would face it as one. The Thornton story was far from over. In fact, its most impactful chapter was just beginning. Taking a deep breath, Maxwell began his address. Distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, today we stand at a crossroads. The world of work is changing, and we must change with it. As he spoke passionately about the global implementation of work-life balance initiatives, Maxwell felt a surge of emotion. This moment was the culmination of years of hard work, personal growth, and family sacrifice. We have seen the success of the 4-day workweek in companies across the globe, he continued, his voice growing stronger. But it's not just about working less. It's about working smarter, about valuing human potential over profit margins. From the corner of his eye, Maxwell caught sight of a familiar face, Veronica. She sat in the middle of the hall, her expression a mix of pride and something else. Regret, perhaps? Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history and divergent paths. As Maxwell delved into the details of the UN initiative, he could see the skepticism on some faces slowly give way to interest. But not everyone looked convinced. Mr. Thornton, came a voice from the audience as the Q&A session began. It was the representative from a prominent Asian nation known for its grueling work culture. While your ideas sound admirable, how can you expect developing nations to compete globally if we reduce working hours? Maxwell paused, considering his response carefully. He thought of the late nights he used to spend at the office, of the milestones he'd missed in his children's lives. Then he thought of the transformation he'd witnessed in his own company and others that had followed suit. With all due respect, he began, his voice firm but compassionate. I believe that's the wrong question. We shouldn't be asking how we can compete by working our people to exhaustion. We should be asking how we can unleash the full potential of our workforce by ensuring they are healthy, happy, and balanced. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Maxwell continued, gaining momentum. When people have time to rest, to be with their families, to pursue their passions, they bring renewed energy and creativity to their work. This isn't just about improving individual lives. It's about driving innovation, increasing productivity, and creating sustainable economic growth. As he finished his response, Maxwell saw Emma give him a subtle thumbs up. His heart swelled with pride and gratitude for his family's unwavering support. The rest of the session flew by in a blur of questions, debates, and discussions. As Maxwell stepped down from the podium, he felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He'd given everything he had, laying out his vision for a better world of work. As the assembly adjourned, Maxwell made his way to his family. Olivia embraced him tightly, whispering, "You were amazing." Ethan clapped him on the back. "Way to go, Dad. You really held your ground with that one delegate." Emma, ever the observant one, looked at him closely. "Are you okay? You seemed emotional up there at one point." Maxwell nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. As a family, as a company, as a movement." As they made their way out of the hall, Maxwell was stopped by countless delegates offering congratulations and wanting to discuss the initiative further. It was Olivia who finally managed to extract him, reminding everyone that even world-changing businessmen need their rest. Later that evening, as the Thornton family sat in their hotel suite overlooking the New York skyline, a comfortable silence fell over them. Maxwell stood by the window, lost in thought. "What's on your mind, honey?" Olivia asked, joining him. Maxwell turned to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just keep thinking, what if we actually pull this off? What if we can change the way the world works, literally?" Olivia took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then you'll have created a legacy far greater than any business empire. You'll have changed millions of lives for the better." As Maxwell looked at his wife, then at his children lounging on the couch, he felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging. Implementing global change was never easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But standing there, surrounded by the love and support of his family, Maxwell Thornton knew he was ready to face whatever came next. The boy who had once measured success in dollars and deals now understood that true wealth lay in the positive impact one could have on the